Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your week in review, your nightly review for Monday, February 4th. Hopefully it won't be a catastrophic weekend review. The global stock averages, as measured by the MSCI World Index of 24 markets, rose 5% in January, as did the S&P 500, for the best start since 1994. You had record inflows into mutual funds and central banks keeping interest rates at zero. That helped, but then reality set in today, as in Europe is back in the news for the wrong reasons. The Dow Jones fell 128 points to 13,881, about 1%. S&P 500 lost 17, 1.2%. NASDAQ was down 47 points for a loss of 1.5%. London's FTSE down 1.6%. Frankfurt DAX down 2.5%. In France, the CAC 40 down 3%. But Spain and Italy, their markets were down 4%. Spain's 10-year bond saw its yield rise to 5.45%. It was just 5.1 recently. Italy's was about 4.1. It rose to 4.45% today. So what's happening? Well, Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy moved to contain a corruption scandal enveloping his party, alleged secret payments to him and other party leaders. There's a petition demanding his resignation. If Rajoy stays, he is severely weakened in terms of implementing his austerity program. If he goes, austerity is out the window. So either way, Spain loses, and today you saw the reaction in the bond market. In a major newspaper poll, 90% of Spaniards believe corruption hurts the nation's credibility and poses a risk of scaring foreign investors away. Rajoy allegedly received €25,000 a year from a slush fund from 1997 to 2008. He was party leader from 2004 to 2011. Rajoy defended himself and his party. Never, I repeat, never have I received undeclared money. He said this in a televised speech over the weekend, calling the documents published by El Pay, the newspaper, apocryphal, adding, "It is not true that we received cash that we hid from tax officials. We must not allow Spaniards, of whom we are demanding sacrifices, to think that we do not observe the strictest ethical rigor." El Pay's survey, conducted by an independent polling firm, showed that Rajoy's Popular Party, that's the name of it, Popular Party, would get 24% of the vote if an election were held today, down from the 45% it won in November of 2011. The problem is the Socialist Party, which governed Spain the 8 years prior to Rajoy, would get an even lower vote, and its leader has a disapproval rating of 81% compared to Rajoy's 77%. In Italy, former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has narrowed the center-left's lead in the upcoming election to just 5 points. Berlusconi has vowed to overturn reform measures implemented by Mario Monti, while blaming Germany for Italy's harsh austerity measures. So the election, which is February 24 and 25, could yield a totally chaotic result, and you have potential chaos in Spain. Down in Washington, President Obama's State of the Union is February 12th. You thought the Super Bowl was exciting? In a discussion Sunday with Scott Pelley prior to the big game, Obama said that he is not interested in further raising income tax rates to reduce the federal debt, but that more tax revenue from the wealthy is needed in the form of closing loopholes and deductions. Obama also said that he wants to reduce red ink through smart cuts in the budget and more efficient administration of existing programs. Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid said on ABC's This Week that tax loopholes should be closed. Again, this is a fundamental difference between the two parties. Republicans insist they have given enough on the revenue front. Congress and the administration are still far from any solution to sequestration. The $1.2 trillion in automatic budget reductions over 10 years, with half of that hitting the Pentagon. So Defense Secretary Leon Panetta told NBC's Meet the Press that allowing these cuts would be a shameful and irresponsible act by Congress which threatened to badly damage national defense. What's depressing in all this talk to me is there's no talk of real tax reform. We had a window, and thanks to the failed leadership of our president, the window is closed. Syrian President Bashar Assad accused Israel of trying to destabilize his country in claiming last week's airstrike showed Israel was behind the revolution seeking to overthrow his regime. The raid itself was humiliating, exposing Assad's vaunted air defense system. Assad was mocked by Turkey, a backer of the rebels. Turkey's foreign minister said, "Why didn't Assad even throw a pebble when Israeli jets were flying over his palace and playing with the dignity of his country?" Israel came close to admitting responsibility for the attack for the first time when Defense Minister Ehud Barak said it was, quote, "another proof that when we say something, we mean it." Both Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and his Iranian counterpart Salahi appeared to give their blessing to an effort by a leading Syrian opposition figure to open talks with Assad, which was encouraging, except from the standpoint that these two are the only countries that can influence Assad, but it's highly doubtful. And this particular opposition leader is making demands that Assad won't agree to, like releasing over 100,000 prisoners. Plus, other dissidents say Assad must go before any negotiations can take place. Over the weekend, Iranian officials warned Israel of a harsh Syrian response to the attack. The deputy head of the Iranian army said that the Syrian counterattack will send Israel into a coma. Iranian Parliament Speaker Ali Larijani warned the world is witnessing a vengeance carried out by the West, particularly the U.S. Meanwhile, the New York Times reported over the weekend that a plan developed last summer by then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and then CIA Director David Petraeus to arm and train Syrian rebels was rebuffed by the White House. The administration rejected the proposal over concerns it could draw the United States into the Syrian conflict and the arms could fall into the wrong hands. In an interview with the Wall Street Journal, Defense Secretary Panetta accused Iran's paramilitary force of an intensified campaign to destabilize the Middle East by smuggling anti-aircraft weapons to its allies. Now these are the so-called man-pads, anti-aircraft missiles that can be carried by a single person. This ought to sound very familiar to you. Panetta called this a dangerous escalation. There is no question when you start passing man-pads around, that becomes a threat not just to military aircraft but to civilian aircraft. Well, I've been saying that's what keeps me up at night. That's what would tank the global economy, a strike on a civilian airliner in the US or Europe or major city in Asia. The head of the Washington Institute's Stein program on counterterrorism and intelligence is a fellow by the name of Dr. Matthew Levitt, who is considered the leading authority on Hezbollah. So he just issued a report that says the Hezbollah Quds force, that's Iran's elite, the Hezbollah Quds Force threat has sometimes eclipsed that of Al-Qaeda. Iranian decision makers settled on a campaign of violence based on a three-tiered threat stream targeting the following: Israeli tourist, government figures such as diplomats, retired officials, and targets broadly representative of Israel or the Jewish community, community leaders, prominent Israeli companies. Levitt writes in his report that Iran's leaders assigned the task of targeting Israeli tourists, a soft target, to Hezbollah, and maintained for the Quds Force operations targeting Israeli, American, British, or Gulf states' interest. The latter would be carried out by a new special external operations unit known as Unit 400. In Mali, French President Hollande made a triumphant visit to Timbuktu over the weekend. This as 30 French warplanes, I didn't realize there were that many involved, have been bombing training camps the last 24 hours in the north, jihadist camps. French troops are turning Timbuktu already over to Malian soldiers as France goes into Gao, where a lot of the terrorists still are outside the area. In Egypt, this happened today, an Egyptian opposition party claims police tortured one of its members to death. Mohammed El-Gindi, a 28-year-old activist, died of his wounds today, according to the Egyptian Popular Current Party. A spokeswoman for this party said she saw El-Gindi's body and that it carried marks of torture. She said he was electrocuted, had broken ribs, and a cord appeared to have been wrapped around his neck. A medical report cited brain hemorrhage as cause of death. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has chaired a high-level meeting over the weekend to discuss a looming, quote, great turn in military capability, according to North Korean state media. So it appears a nuclear test, their third, is imminent. Intelligence sources told the South China Morning Post that the country has completed preparations, and many in South Korea believe the test will come before the Lunar New Year, which starts on February 10th. Massive European intelligence investigation into football, into soccer. Nearly 700 games globally are now deemed suspicious. This is a little, a little confusing. only because there have been other investigations in the past. So all these stories are now hitting today, 680 soccer matches in question. But I don't know how much overlap there is with previous investigations. But it covers 380 games in Europe, including World Cup and European Championship qualifiers, as well as Champions League games, including one match played in England. So everybody's trying to figure that one out. They have not identified, authorities haven't identified specific players. I'm struck by the relatively low 11 million in profits. This investigation covers games from 2008 to 2011. 425 people are under suspicion. 50 supposedly have been arrested. And the operation is evidently headquartered in Singapore. By the way, after the Super Bowl, it's now back to college basketball, if you can't read that. Indiana's back #1 in today's AP poll, Florida #2, and Michigan #3. It's a great game Saturday night between Indiana and Michigan, which the Hoosiers won 81-73. My proprietary Super Bowl indicator, this is the 13th time the loser scored more than 20 points. The previous 12 times this happened, the S&P finished up on the year on a total return basis. That's important. Sure was a fun game last night. The comments I'm getting from friends, we're all in amazement over Colin Kaepernick. What a talent. But think about it, between RG3, Andrew Luck, Russell Wilson, Kaepernick, Flacco is 28, Aaron Rodgers is still just 29, Matt Ryan is 27. You have 7 great quarterbacks in their 20s. Matthew Stafford, who took a step back this year, he's still just 24. Josh Freeman is 25. Call it 9 real good quarterbacks in their 20s. And I'm a New York Jet fan, and we have Mark Sanchez. Take care.